enablement is one of those things that everybody knows it's a good thing. I used to have hair before I went into enablement. If you don't change something, then you can't expect that the results are going to change.
Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of The Sound of Sales. You've all heard of sales enablement, but how do you tackle it properly and how do you structure it for your business? I have a conversation with Al Graves and we're going to tell you all about this. For the people that don't know who you are, can you explain how your young daughter would explain what daddy does for a living?
Oh, now that is a really interesting question. I'll have to ask her one day. She'd probably say that I work too much. That's probably what she would say, because it interferes with her playtime. Yeah, but I guess you're talking about sales, right? So I think anybody that's involved in sales in any respect is going to recognize that to be good at what you do, it's not 9 to 5, and it never will be. And anybody that goes into sales thinking that it's going to be a 9 to 5 job, they're never gonna excel really in what they do.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So what would your other daughter say that you do for a living? We need something.
You need to. I think, yeah. I mean, they know that what I do is all about helping salespeople become better at what they do. That's effectively,
Mhm.
and I think that's how I sum up what I do. People talk about enablement and they say, "What is enablement?" And for
Yeah.
me, it's all about making sure that salespeople have got everything that they need to be as successful as they can do. So I think my daughters will have heard me say that
Yeah.
more times. Um, that's what I do, is just help salespeople do better at what they do.
Mhm. Yeah, so you're a pro in sales enablement, if I can say it like that. I remember I remember when I first saw you, I have to tell this, was on a Showpad event in London. And I was sitting in the crowd and you were doing a talk. I think at the time you were at Exponia. And I was like baffled by the way you could bring across your message. And I was like, whatever this guy would sell me, I would buy it just from listening to you.
Excellent. Let me add you on a list for a call later this week then.
But yeah, so you're essentially you're in sales enablement. Um, it's sometimes used as a very broad term. I think you will agree that sometimes people that are just training sales reps are seen as enablement, and otherwise, in some companies, it's people that make sure they are on the right tech stack. What would you use as a definition for your position in sales enablement?
Yeah, it's a good one, because sales enablement is one of those terms that's developed over the years. It's become, I suppose, over the last few years, it's become more trendy.
Mhm.
I think it evolved from sales training, right? I think a lot of organizations wanted to have their sales teams trained, and they wanted coaches. And sales managers and sales leaders often don't have the time to train and to coach their own staff. Even with all the best intentions in the world,
Yeah.
everything takes over and it becomes the last thing that people want to do. So a lot of organizations got to the point where um, they would invest in bringing sales trainers in, external people, but ultimately you bring an external person in, they don't know your business, they don't know your team, they don't know your market, and regardless of how much they can do um, to learn about it, they're never going to learn about it to be really credible enough to deliver a compelling message to your sales team. So then people started looking at it and thinking, well, maybe we need to have somebody internally as a trainer and a coach who's our own person who can grow with the business. They can develop our own people. And I think that's where it came from, is that
Mhm.
but to get a good enablement person or a good trainer come in, they need to be somebody that's been there, they've walked the walk, they've talked the talk as a salesperson, and they've got experience. But how to get a good salesperson who's actually really good at their job to quit
Mhm.
a quota carrying role to become a trainer is a tough job. You're going to have to compensate them, right? You're going to have to pay them as well as you would have to pay
Yeah.
them if they were a salesperson. And a lot of companies thought, well, we can't justify paying that amount of money just for a trainer or a coach. So let's look at what other things we can get them involved in to help generate that return for this great salary we're going to have to pay this person to get them to be come in and train our staff. And that's where it evolved into looking at performance, looking at the right tools, developing the right tools, making sure salespeople have got all the right content, they've got the right sales decks, they're talking the right talk, their positioning, the value propositions right, they've got all the content, the one pages, the case studies, success stories, and being that link with all the other parts of the business to make sure that they have everything that they need. So that's where I think it evolved from being, we need a good person, we have to pay them well, what else can we get them to do that's going to bring value and give us that return?
Yeah, indeed. So you're the shackle between everything that's happening within the sales organization. And does it also involve close relation then with marketing department, and making sure everything is aligned?
Yeah, I mean, sales enablement, I think that's the conduit that, within between sales and pretty much every other department within the business. My role at the moment, I have a very, very strong relationships with marketing, and that involves product marketing. I've got very strong relationships with the product team because we need to make sure that the sales teams are educated enough on the product and actually what the product does. I'm the conduit to the legal team to make sure that they have everything that they need and they understand all about compliance, security, all the legal aspects of it. There's the content team as well, making sure they've got the right content. Between the customer success team as well to help that transition. So if you think about all the different departments within an organization, sales enablement is the function that draws it all together and makes sure that we're taking all the right knowledge from all the right parts of the business and feeding it to the sales team to make sure that they're best prepared to do what they need to do. But often it's pushing it back as well, right? Because the salespeople are the ones that are on the front lines. They're the ones talking to customers. So we need to make sure that we're pushing that knowledge and that information back to the right teams so that they're learning from it as well.
Yeah, indeed. And I can imagine that sometimes you're a little bit squeezed between all the things. And do you notice that people give you that they push back on you?
Yeah, you know what? Enablement is one of those things that everybody knows it's a good thing. Everybody knows that enablement's important. It's absolutely essential to the sales function to really get that performing team. But it's often the last in the priority list for everybody, right? They know that they need to have it, but it's just like, yeah, I've got something else, and you'll get meetings pushed back quite often because some things come up. Sorry, I'm gonna have to push that meeting, but everybody knows it's a priority. But it's just making sure that we're educating people and often being quite assertive and sort of saying, look, we've got these objectives. This is what we're trying to achieve. I know you're busy. We need to make time for this.
So they know you're gonna give them a hard time sometimes. So they're go away.
I used to have hair before I went into enablement. Let me just put it that way.
How did you land into enablement? What was your process like? Because you have years of experience in sales. When did you start in sales? What was it like to go through the whole journey and now sitting at the knots, so to say?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because it's very cliche in the sense that I fell into sales. Pretty much everybody says, "Oh, I fell into sales."
Yeah.
And it's true, right? I left university and I got a job in recruitment. And anybody that knows recruitment knows it is an incredibly tough sales job, right? Because you're selling to customers to try and get them to give you, to work with you, but you're also selling to candidates to try and get them to take the jobs that you're representing your customers for, right? And it was very old school sales mentality, proper, hard, cold calling. Looking through, before the days of internet and everything else, you had a telephone directory and you'd be cold calling from a telephone directory or going through newspapers, circling companies with telephone numbers in there that you could actually target. That was where I started from. But even before that, I was knocking on doors. My very first sales job, I was knocking on doors selling windows. double glazing. Like it was when I was at university, part-time job, 6 p.m. till 9 p.m. at night, walking around the streets, knocking on doors, trying to convince people to buy double glazing windows. Um, and
I I have to think about this series that was on Netflix. I forgot how it hands of gold of golden hands with W windows. They were also window salesmen.
I've not seen that. Yeah.
It's so
But it
funny.
is, yeah. I mean, so my early sales career, I mean, it was the proper hard sales, proper old school, as we would, as old folk would say. And I think you either love sales or you hate it. I loved
Yeah.
it, and did quite well. And even knocking on doors, selling double glazing, I was promoted within a few months to be a team leader. Um, Even with recruitment, within 6 months, promoted to managing my own office. And I was only in my early
Nice.
20s at that point. But it's very, yeah, it's a hard job, and I got to a point after a number of years that I just had enough, and I just had to have a bit of a break. So
Hmm.
I ended up um, getting out and going completely, doing something completely out of my comfort zone. And I ended up in Honduras in Latin America, and I set up a school out there. I
Awesome.
started volunteering in a school and thought, you know what, we can do better than this. So I ended up setting up a school for kids, for underprivileged kids, and um, I just loved it. It was it was 3 years out there, and it was just an incredible experience
Oh,
to do. But it doesn't last a lifetime, and I knew that I had to come back to reality and come back to the UK. But then there was the question of what do I do now that I've had these 3 incredible years doing something completely different? Do I go back into recruitment? Do I go back into sales? I don't want to be a teacher because that's not
yeah.
what I really want to do in life. But I actually enjoyed the whole teaching side of things. And one of my friends said, "Well, why don't you combine, that kind of school education side with your ambition and passion in sales, and do some sales training, coaching, that kind of thing."
Yeah.
And that's what I did, and loved it. But I got to a point where being the ambitious person that I was, didn't want to continue working for somebody all my life, and so I went out by myself as a training consultant and a coach.
Yep.
Worked for myself for 8 years doing that, and back to your question about how it evolved into enablement was I started off just delivering training courses and coaching for people, but then I found that a lot of customers would come to me, and I'd have a director or a managing director come to me and say, "Look, Al, I want you to come and deliver a training course to my sales team, and I want you to deliver a training course on, whatever it is, maybe account planning or objection handling or something
Mhm.
like that." And after a while, I started to learn that often people's perception of what they thought was the problem isn't actually the problem. And you'd get a sales director that would say, "Look, I need you to come in and train my team because they're absolutely crap at whatever it is. Can you come and
Mhm.
deliver a training course for them?" And as I start to look and dig into it, I would often find that, well, actually, you know what? The problem isn't in training. The problem is actually the way they're being managed right now, because these systems, these processes that you've got in place, or actually the managers that you've got in place, they're just not doing a very good job. And if you change this and if you change that, then you probably don't need to do any training at all, because you just have to make a few changes. And because I started to become a little bit more consultative in that sense, rather than me just delivering training, I was doing a lot
Mhm.
more with organizations and starting to look at, well, other than just training, what else can I do? How else can I support you to make your salespeople more effective?
Yep.
And it wasn't until many years later on, when this whole term sales enablement appeared, that I thought, well, you know what? I've actually been doing sales enablement even before sales enablement was a thing. The whole definition of what it was
Yep.
absolutely everything that I was doing, but nobody ever called it enablement at that point. And
You're the
that's what
original.
yeah, well, that's right. That's what I say. If I'm talking to people, I say, you know what? I was doing it before it was even a thing.
Doing it before it was cool.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Awesome. And how do you find it? Is it because you're now back on the payroll, so you move back to that stage? Um, was that a conscious decision where like I'm fed up with constantly on the lookout being for new projects, or was it like an
You know,
opportunity that came
the
across?
my biggest frustration with working for myself as an external consultant is I never got to see it through to the end and see the results of what I was
Mhm.
doing because they were all short-term things. Like, oh yes, I have had some customers where I work with them long-term, but I would go in and I would deliver some training, some coaching, help them put in place a new sales process or help them pull together whatever project it was. But
Yeah.
because they were paying me as an external consultant, they're not going to continue paying me forever. So I would go in and I'd do the groundwork and then I would hand over to them to do. And
Mhm.
I often would never see the result of it. Or what would happen is they wouldn't support it, or they weren't pushing it through the business. As soon as I left, it would just go downhill because there was nobody pushing it and managing it
Yeah.
and reinforcing it right. So then I would get a call back maybe 6 months later saying, "Can you come in again?" Because we've and the same problems existed because nobody was reinforcing it. And those that were successful, it just got to a point where I was frustrated because I just didn't see the success of
Yeah,
what it
indeed.
was. And the only way I can do that is just completely dedicating myself to one organization where I can start do the building of the foundations. I can build it, I can grow it, and I can actually be there to see the success of what I'm doing. That was the key
Mhm.
driving factor for me, really.
Yeah. And I think the as you said, the definition of sales enablement is something that's fairly new.
Hmm.
Um, how do you keep up currently with the latest trends? Like, do you have tips for people that are moving into enablement, or have this sense of like, yeah, it might be something that ties our marketing and our sales department together? How do you keep up? What would you recommend people to get into
It,
it? Because it's a lot.
Yeah, you know what? It is all about keeping up to date. LinkedIn is an amazing place, right, for keeping up to date on who's doing what. There's so many articles, discussions,
Mhm.
etc. that you can read, and it's always, it's been a while since there's anything been in person, but enablement events. Like that event you were talking about that where we first met
Yeah.
at that Showpad event. It's fantastic places to just learn what people are doing and just to absorb what people are doing. And I think that's just a really crucial part of it is just building a network of enablement people. And you'll always find I've never met an enablement person yet that is really um, closed or protective
Mhm.
over what they're doing. You find in some situations, particularly in sales, people don't want to tell other people what they're doing that's
Yeah.
working so well. But in enablement, I've never seen that. Everybody's so happy to share what they're doing and the successes and what's worked and what's not worked.
Mhm.
So yeah, you're networking, reading lots about articles and anything that people are doing is really important.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And is it like from some maturity in a company, you could there must be a tipping point where it makes sense to dive into that, or do you think like a lot of companies are waiting too long to jump into enablement, and they could, or they may be already actually doing stuff, but on an unstructured way, where if they would be a little bit more conscious about what they're doing, they could maybe shorten their processes, their go to market, their, yeah, everything
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah, it's a good question. My passion is the fast-growing SaaS startup scale-up businesses.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think I thrive in those kind of environments, and they're a very typical example of is very chicken and egg situation in that a lot of organizations, a lot of SaaS startups, they look at it and they think, yeah, we really want enablement, but
Hmm.
we can't really afford, or we don't really want to justify an enablement person yet because we've got such a small team. Well, my advice is always that it's best to start putting enablement in place in the early days while you've got a small team because it's easier than to scale. You've got everything that you need. You've got the structure, you've got the knowledge base, you've got all the onboarding, you've got the continual development, you've got the tools all in place, so that you're in a much better position to grow quicker and to grow successfully. a lot quicker, rather than what tends to happen is, it gets to be when sales teams are about 30 strong, um, and then they realize, crap, we need to get somebody to come and help support in this enablement role. And then it's that scenario of flying the plane whilst building it, particularly when they're on that upward trajectory of hyper growth, because
Yeah.
they're growing massively. They're bringing on more and more new people all the time, but you're still trying to put things in place at the same time. Whereas actually, if they'd invested a lot earlier on and put the structure in place earlier on, then that whole hyper growth mode that they're now finding themselves in will be much easier, because you've got everything in place already, rather than trying to build it as you're going along.
Yeah. And what would be the core elements you would say within that framework? Because you talk about tools, you said the word tools. Um, is that putting in place even a learning management system and all that sort of stuff, even when you're still small? Or which tools would you think like these are really crucial in at any stage? And they, of course, they can evolve, but
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, one of the big ones really is about content management. It's because to grow quickly, you're going to have a good BDR team, SDR team, and they rely on having content to share. The one pages, the
Mhm.
case studies, the success stories, to be able to share with prospects, and just to nurture those leads through the whole process. If you've not got content, if you've not got regular up to date content, if you've not continually got new content that you can share and help the process along with, then they're going to struggle. But having a platform where it almost, I've put in place platforms where it will almost recommend content depending on what stage you're at in the sales
Mhm.
process. I'm putting in a platform at the moment that is it's a fantastic tool in the sense that it integrates with Salesforce, which is our CRM system, and depending on the stage that they're in, depending on the persona that they're speaking to, depending on the vertical and the market that they're operating in, it will actually recommend content. It will say, okay, you're in the discovery stage. You're talking to an IT manager persona, and you're targeting an organization within the maritime industry. We recommend these are the pieces of content that you need to share. And it's based on past success or the impact that content has had on previous deals and moving deals through. I think getting things like that in place early on, it's a big investment, but you're setting yourself up for success, because they're more successful the more you use them, and
Mhm.
it kind of gathers insight as to how people are engaging and what content people are using. So it just becomes a lot easier to scale that kind of situation.
Yeah. If you have all the content, of course, I see a lot of companies that wait quite long to produce content or valuable content.
Yeah. And that's the challenge, right? Again, it's all chicken. There's so many chicken and egg situations, and if
Mhm.
you wait until you've got loads of content, then the whole job and the whole process of putting in place a platform like that becomes a lot more difficult, and it's a lot
Yeah.
more challenging, because then you've got to look at all your content, and you've got to upload all your content. You've got to think about tagging it.
Mhm.
It just makes it more difficult. And you're right, there's a balance, because not everybody that's got three salespeople are going to go out and make an investment in a big tool if they've only got five pieces of
Yeah,
content.
indeed.
So it is always balancing.
Yeah, indeed, indeed. And how do you notice that, or how do you find that salespeople are um, welcoming sales enablement? Because I can imagine they're a little bit skeptic about some parts of like all the salespeople I know are very egocentric. Like they have an ego. They're like,
Yeah.
don't tell me what to do. How do you tackle that? Is that something that you have to tackle currently at the company you're at, or that you have had in the past?
I think I've been quite blessed in that sense. And there's very
Mhm.
few people that I've come across recently that don't have that recognition that I could do better at what I'm doing, and any support and help that I can get is going to help me. Therefore, it's better for me. I think that's one of the advantages of enablement as a role as a whole, is that it's not just talking about training and coaching, right? It's the whole package, and I think I am very keen on looking at skills and competencies and those kind of frameworks, which actually look at individual people, and assesses where are their skills and weaknesses, and rather than just pushing out a piece of training that everybody has to go through regardless, we can actually target it, and we can say, okay, these 5 people are all struggling in this one key competency.
Yeah.
Therefore, let's pull together a program for these 5 people and make it very focused on these 5 people. And the other 20 people, they're doing okay. So let's not waste their time in dragging them into having to attend this training, because you're right, they're going to be sitting there thinking, well, why am I sat here? I don't need to be here, and I'm a salesperson. I want to be on the phone. I want to be talking to my customers, etc. But yeah, sales, it's full of egos to a point, and they have to have that confidence to be successful. But I think one of the good traits of a good salesperson who will be successful is the salesperson that recognizes that then they don't know everything. They can still learn. There's still a lot more that they can get out of other people that are there to support them, to make them better. It would always be a big red flag for me. Salespeople that think they're the finished article.
Yeah, indeed, that's true. But you come across that type of salespeople very often, I find.
Often the most common times that you find those kind of salespeople is when you're interviewing them because they're looking for another job, right?
Yep. Yeah, true.
And then you ask yourself, well, why are they looking for another job? Well, there you go. That could be an answer in itself.
Another thing is keeping finger on the pulse. Like how do you tap into that? Do you use technology to make sure that the performance is being measured, that you can spot gaps even before they know there are gaps? Or is that more like a one-on-one basis that you keep in check with the team?
A lot of it. I mean, certainly within the size of organizations that I'm working with. I mean, I was at AWS previously. That's just a completely different ball game because it's so huge. But within the startup scale up world, the companies are small enough to be able to keep your fingers on the pulse just by having those relationships with people. Looking at those key competencies. I do a lot of listening of calls. We record all of our calls, so I'll often spend time just listening to people's calls, and just hearing how they're approaching things, and having conversations and just building those relationships with people is just absolutely key.
If I think about myself, how would I react if somebody came in and said, "I listened to your call and A, B, and C wasn't all right"? I'm not sure if I would be the person to like that, but
It's one of those things nobody likes. Nobody likes the idea that anybody's listening into them. But I think it's a culture thing. And I think it needs to be something that that salespeople just learn to accept, and it's part of the process. But the way that we look at it, where I am currently, is it's not all about, we don't record calls because we want to pull people up on where they're making mistakes. We record it so we can share best practice, so that we can, when there's a really good call, we can share it with the rest of the team and say, hey, people, come and have a listen to this call, because this is a really good example of this situation. Or, where we were coming up against this competitor, this key competitor, just have a listen to this call and just hear how this salesperson tackled that situation and managed that whole call. And I think when you start to approach things in the sense that it's a situation where yes, that you are going to highlight certain things that didn't go well, but you can get a lot more value out of doing it in a completely different way of saying, look, here's an example of what's good, here's best practice, have a listen to these calls, and approaching it in that way. People will always recognize, if they see a really good call, they will always recognize what they don't do and what's missing from their call. So you don't
Yeah.
often need to tell them. You just get them to listen to it, and they'll be like, "Oh, yeah, I don't do that." Or, or they'll hear somebody else's call and someone else will say something that was really bad, and they'll recognize it and think, "Oh crap, I say that on my calls, and that sounds so bad. I'm never going to say that again." So if you're clever about it, you don't need to pull people up a lot
Mm.
of times.
True, true. What's one of the number one mistakes you can think of that you heard on one of the calls?
Um, not not signposting the call, not, yeah, I think one of the things that what tends to happen is, you have a 45-minute call booked. And if you don't plan the call, if you don't set out your agenda, if you don't set out your expectations, what you want to cover, if you don't check, at the before you start, if it's a 45-minute meeting, just confirm, say, look, I know we've got 45 minutes planned.
Hmm.
Just want to check. Are you happy? Are you still happy with 45 minutes? Have you got an absolute dead stop at the end of 45 minutes, or have we got a little
Hmm.
bit of extra time? And signposting what you're expecting to get out of the call, because otherwise, what happens is you end up at 40 minutes. And then you realize you've not
Yeah,
achieved everything you want to. And then you're rushing the last 5 minutes. And then you get to 45 minutes and the customer says, "Oh, look, I'm really sorry. Got to jump. I got another call." And you haven't even
yeah,
had a chance to clarify what the next steps are going to be and get any commitment for the next steps. And then you try to do it by email. And doing it by email after the call has happened is always going to be more challenging. So you need to make sure that you're giving yourself those 10, 15 minutes at the end to wrap things up, to make sure you're getting commitment to the next steps. Because if you don't do it at the end of that call, it's so much more difficult beyond that time.
true. I have an aha moment right here.
We've all had those. So yeah, I would be lying if I said I hadn't had those calls where I get to the end and I get rushed off by the customer, and then think, and then it's literally as soon as the call's ended, that's when you have that moment where you think, damn, I forgot to ask this, or I should have
Yeah,
done this. And it always happens the moment you've hung up the call when it's too late.
yeah, yeah. Or you then try to send an email and then they don't reply immediately, so you're
Yeah.
like cringing away.
It's absolutely that. Yeah.
Have a lot of people that are on LinkedIn spreading out what you need to personalize, and some said you don't need to personalize this or that. It depends on who you're targeting, that sort of stuff. Like, what would you advise someone in your team? Like, what are the variables in order to decide how much time you should put in an email?
Yeah, that is a really difficult question to answer, right? Because it is so relative, and
Hmm.
there's just such a huge balance between, do you just smash out 100 emails and
Yeah,
just rely on the law of averages that says, okay, if I send out more emails, then I'm more likely to get a response back because the law of averages says X amount are likely to convert, or
yeah.
do you write a lot fewer emails and be really tailored, very specific in them. And I think a lot of times it depends on at what stage you're reaching out. If this is totally cold, then um, I think it all depends on how close that individual fits to your ideal customer profile.
Yeah.
If you're looking at this opportunity and everything about them screams this is an opportunity, I've done a bit of research, or I know this company, and they fit, they're definite fit, and they're a fit, then that's a situation you have to spend more time and be a lot more personalized, and think about
Hmm.
how you're going to do it. And I think a lot of it just comes down to how much profiling an organization does in terms of their ideal customer profile, or whether you're just throwing a lot out there and hoping to make some of it work.
Yeah. I think a lot of people out there, there's a definition of personalizing, I believe. Like, what's personalization to you? Is that knowing the name of your dog or the car you drive, or is that personalizing about the company you work for and being relevant on that end? Because there are a lot of nuances, and like, yeah, you could tie your product mission to the local football club you're supporter of. You know what I mean? Like, how extreme is personalizing?
Well, I think I think you hit the nail on the head. It's about relevance. It's about being relevant. Um, and yeah, of course, the more relevant your message is, or the more relevant um, that you position yourself and what you're trying to say to them, the more likely
Hmm.
they are going to be they're likely to respond. But I think, yeah, I mean, if you look at their LinkedIn
Think
profile.
about emails you receive. Think about emails you receive. Like which ones do you reply on and which ones you ignore.
Yeah, I always reply more to those emails where somebody just has a bit of cheek and
Mhm.
they've spotted something. You know, um I had one guy reach out to me, and I probably shouldn't even admit this on this, but I when I was working for myself, I created a series of YouTube videos, and I cringe every time I see those videos. I just think,
They're still
oh,
online.
yeah, no, no, they're not still online. What am I doing? And he made some comment about he just connected out of the blue, and he said, "I've been watching your YouTube channel. I found them really helpful. Particularly this one." And he made a comment. I'm not even going to tell you what the comment was. He made about one of them that just made me sit with my head in my hand and think, "Oh my God, I can't even believe this is still on the internet." And he laughed about it and put a lol at the end. But I mean, it caught my attention, right? It was just totally personalized. Um, but made me cringe like hell, thinking I really need to figure out a way to remove these videos.
You lost your password or anything?
Yeah, well, I can't. I don't have access to the email address that I used at the time, and I can't remember my password. And YouTube is just impossible to delete content,
Yeah.
so it's gonna be
Well,
there forever, haunting me for the rest of my life.
I need to download them.
Hey, you may learn something.
True, true. But did you end up buying? Did you take the meeting?
I took the meeting, but I've not bought. I've not bought yet. It's still early days. I mean, this only literally happened last week.
Oh, all
Um,
right.
but
So,
so
to
yeah,
anyone listening, trying to sell a product to you,
yeah. Find me on you. No, don't find me on YouTube. This does not exist.
it's
Um,
happening, Al. It's
but
happening.
yeah, but that's what I mean, right? That was personalization. That was totally,
Yeah.
and I don't know whether he um, stumbled across my YouTube and thought, oh, I'm going to target this guy, or whether he legitimately was watching the videos and
Mhm.
I don't know which way around it was, but
You need to
it
ask.
it caught my attention.
Awesome. Well, that's personalization that could work, I believe.
Yeah, but the challenge, salespeople have got this challenge, and some people are just notoriously difficult to personalize anything because
Hmm.
they some people just don't put a lot out there. So if there's not a lot to find out, then there's not a lot to personalize people. And then times you'll create what you think is the most amazing personalized email, and you think there is not a chance this person is not going to reply to this because this is such a freaking good email,
And then
and
nothing.
then you get nothing at all, and you think, what? How has this actually happened?
Yeah. Yeah, and then then you start to think about the cost of acquisition, the cost of
Yeah,
sales, like what is a good ratio? Because you can personalize 50 emails, get maybe 20 replies. So you're already losing a little bit of time on the 30 emails that you personalize and maybe spend 15 to 30 minutes on it. But if you do that, you only have 16 emails in a day if you spend 30 minutes on them. So,
yeah. I think it has to be it has to be part of a wider outreach approach. I
mhm,
think it's very difficult to rely purely on just cold outreach. I think building your brand, getting brand awareness, putting content out there so people
yeah,
recognize your product, they recognize your company name, um, getting in front of their face, whether
yeah.
that's through content or targeted campaigns, or whether that's you specifically getting in front of people's face through their social media, like LinkedIn, commenting, liking, sharing their posts and things. Yeah, I think all
Mhm.
of those combined with a more personalized approach when you do um, when you do reach out to them is likely to be a lot more effective rather than spending lots of time just personalizing lots of emails just in itself purely. I think
Yeah.
that's when you're going to chat. That's when it's going to be a problem. I think you've got to combine it with a much wider approach.
Yeah, it's more like an account-based marketing approach that you're referring to, right?
Absolutely,
Like,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
But that makes the cost even
You've got
like
to have
that's
it
an
right.
increase.
You've
Yeah.
you've got to get ABM right. But I've seen it done right, and it works incredibly well. Um, and there is always that fear of to do it well, you've got to spend a lot of money doing it,
Hmm.
and it's that initial getting over that initial fear until you see the results, because a lot of people don't see the instant results and they go, oh no, and they panic and they're out of there and they
Hmm.
think, I've spent X amount this month, I've not seen anything, I can't afford to do this, I don't continue doing this. And you've got to have the right people running those kind of campaigns who know what they're doing, and
Yeah, indeed.
you've got to have the confidence, and you've got to stand your ground and think, okay, I'm not going to get an instant result, but it's worth it because I am going to.
Yeah, and I think you need to like be very persistent on that end. And I see a lot of salespeople that sometimes get a little bit pushed back in terms of, yeah, you still have your quota hanging above your head, right? And you still need to make that. So on that moment when you're doing ABM, you also rely on what marketing is doing. You rely on other ends. Um, so I can yeah. How do you make sure that the weight is spread across all those channels and still be able to reach your quota? Because I think if somebody is listening right now and it says, all right, ABM, yeah, might be multi-channel approach. We're gonna do this and that. It's not like it's gonna bring you a return on investment overnight. Like this is a
No.
long process.
Yeah, it is right, and you also need to understand your customers and your prospect base, in
Hmm.
terms of where they are, because there's no point, you can say I'm going to have this multi-channel approach and just smash across all channels, but you need to know where are your customers, where are your prospects, where do they engage, which channel is going to be the best channel, um, for you. Within some industries, they may do an awful lot on Facebook. Other people won't touch Facebook, and it's purely on LinkedIn. Some
True.
won't really be active on social media very much at all, and they might have a company page on there. They might have a few staff on LinkedIn, but they're not active on there. So there's absolutely no point targeting it in that way. So you've got to know your customers and your prospect base as to which is going to be the best approach to take, whether it is across multiple channels all at the same time, or whether you're just going to focus on Facebook, Instagram,
Yeah.
LinkedIn.
That's another tool on your tool list that you need in order to find out how that is all
it,
working out.
I mean, the amount of tools available
It's
is
insane.
it is insane, and we are continually targeted by. I mean, I get emails almost every day or two, wanting to introduce me to a new platform of some sort. And
Hmm.
it's incredible what platforms can do these days, or incredible what people claim platforms can do, right? Um,
Yeah.
and it's just incredibly difficult to know. And sometimes you can pass stuff. I'm sure I will have passed tools by, and they could have been absolutely incredible, but I just didn't, for whatever reason, maybe because of the way they outreached, or because of the way
Yeah.
that I perceived the value. I just disregarded it, and it could have been absolutely amazing, but I would never know.
How do you think the tool landscape will evolve? Because now sales enablement, I'm not sure how many years it has been that people call it sales enablement. It's already getting new names. I think revenue enablement is a newer term, and then yeah, it's going to evolve and evolve. How do you think it will impact sales teams, like with new technology and that sort of stuff?
Well, I think you're right in saying that it's evolved, and revenue enablement or revenue operations and enablement is even more um, common now, and just enablement as a title by itself, not even just revenue. And I think a lot of people, a lot of organizations have had, and I've had it before, where you put enablement projects in place, you put different processes, or you you do something new from an enablement perspective for sales. And it's
Mhm.
often the case where you'll get other departments saying, "Oh, this is actually really, really cool. Can we do this within our team?" It's nothing to do with sales, but they just
Yeah.
see what you're putting into place and what you're starting to build, and they think, "Oh, we really, really would love to have something like that for our team." So then it starts to evolve, and that's how you end up finding that this whole approach to sales enablement suddenly becomes revenue enablement, or just enablement as a whole, because other parts of the business want to take value from it. And I think in terms of tools, what I've started to see over the last couple of years is a lot more of consolidation of tools. There's a lot of organizations that are buying up, making acquisitions of smaller tools to merge in, and,
Mhm.
and to pull it into their own platform, because they see value in this this one-stop shop. They want to be the enablement tool with everything in there, rather than organizations having 15 different tools. They can just have a handful of tools. And I think there's some value in that. I think it can be quite frustrating at times, because
Mhm.
people are trying to create these platforms that are just have multiple different tools within the same platform. And I think it depends on the tool, because sometimes, well, very rarely actually, I would say that there's a platform that does everything really well. Usually they'll do some things really well and you'll love it, but then there's one element of it they do really badly,
Yeah.
but then it becomes more difficult, because you think, I'd really love to replace that one part and get another tool to come in and do that. But because you've invested in this one tool, and you've actually got this tool as part of the platform, to then say you're going to switch that plugin off and actually buy it in again um, through another provider, it's
Mhm.
difficult to then justify the cost of it.
Yeah,
But I
indeed.
think, yeah, I think a lot of it's going to move towards these more consolidated platforms.
Mhm. And from all your past experiences, if you're talking about the cost, like what would a scale up, like a company that's currently growing, what do you think is like enablement tools? Like what budget is on that? Like I can't even think of a figure, but I know some tools specifically, and their price tag it goes into the hundreds or thousands of euros or pounds sometimes. That goes into enablement. It's insane. Like what do you think is the cost per hat, to call it like that?
Yeah, this is a very difficult question. I mean, but you're talking hundreds per month,
Yeah,
per user per month.
per user. It's
And
insane.
I mean, you can easily be talking, 500 euros per user per month,
Hmm.
if you're not careful. But um, it's just being smart about it, right? Because no one's gonna complain at spending 500 euros per user per month
True.
on various different tools if it's
Yeah.
generating the right return. But the problem with having too many tools is you've got to manage it, and you've got to be able to assess what value these tools are providing.
Hmm.
And I think it's about prioritizing what's right for you at the time, and building it up slowly, and putting in place, a few tools, and working with them, seeing what value you get, rather than, before you know it, you can get um,
Indeed.
overwhelmed with
Especially if you
tools.
see the price tag at the end of the month, and like, whoa.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a scary thing when you start to add things up. You bring in a new tool and you think, oh yeah, it's only going to cost 80 euros per user per month. And you think, that's not a lot. But then when you look at it and you think, yeah, but I'm already spending the X amount per user per month. This bumps it up even more. Um,
Hmm.
so yeah, I mean, I don't, in terms of budget, what should people budget? I don't think it's a question
But it gives
that's,
an idea. It gives a good idea.
yeah, it's crazy. It is crazy, but you've just got to make sure you've got the right tools in place,
Hmm.
um, because otherwise you just end up spending a shed load of money on tools that just people don't use. And salespeople are fickle, right? If They won't use a tool if it's not giving them value. And if you've chosen the wrong tool and it's not providing the value, and you've signed up
For a
to a
year.
new tool, and a year if you're lucky, right? But every single SaaS provider is going to try, when it gets to that negotiation stage, they're all going to say to you, give me a 3-year contract and I'm going to bring the price down for you. And that's the tempting point, because there'll be
Mhm.
significant discounts often to get that 3-year deal, which is great if it's the right tool. But if it's the wrong tool and you're then stuck with it for 3 years and nobody wants to use it because it's just not working or giving them the value, then that budget you're talking about can be significantly dwindled because you're paying for a tool that people just don't want.
Yeah, indeed. And I think when I hear like 3-year contract, the only thing I can think of is that the return on investment of some of the tools is just not within the first month.
There's always a ramp up time with new tools and technology, and it's difficult to understand at what point you're going to start to see the value in it. We've been looking at some call recording technology, and it sounds all fantastic. I don't know when we're going to really start to see
Yeah,
true
indeed.
value. We'll get value from it because we can start looking. We record calls and excuse me.
No worries.
Um, we record calls, and we can instantly make them available to everybody, and we can highlight best practice. If somebody does something well, like what we were talking about before, we can share it with the rest of the team. We can get instant value from that. But there's a lot more to look at in terms of what value you're going to get, that return on investment, and when that's actually going to happen.
True, true. Well, it has been a super interesting conversation. I could talk about tool stacks for another hour, I think. But to wrap things up, I have one more question, and that is, if I could give you a billboard on the M1 to London, I'm not sure if the M1 goes to London, but from what
It
I
does
understood.
indeed. It does. Yeah.
All right. So if I could give you a billboard right there, what would you put on it and why?
Oh, what would I put on it?
Yeah. It doesn't have to be sales related. It can be like a life quote or whatever.
I would say, if you always do what you've always done in the way you've always done it, you'll only get what you've always got.
That's deep. I don't think it needs explanation as well. It's quite clear.
Yeah.
That's a nice one. Where did you get that one?
It kind of evolved, I think, from different things that I'd heard. It all comes down to, I think it was a point that I got to in my career where I just found that um, I was bored, or I was frustrated that that I'd hit a bit of a plateau and I wasn't able to
Hmm.
get beyond that. And I had this mentality that I was doing well. I was being successful in what I was doing, but I hit that plateau and I couldn't get any further. But my mindset was that I knew the recipe, I knew what I needed to do, I knew the formula, and I just had to keep on doing it and doing it again
Hmm.
and again and again, because I know this formula works, I know this recipe works, and I couldn't understand why I wasn't being able to get beyond that plateau. And it was a point when somebody said, "Well, if you've if you're not getting beyond that plateau, doing what you've always done that has been successful, you're going to have to do something different, because if you're not going to do something different, you're never going to get anything out that's different." And it
Yep.
just dawned on me, and I was like, yeah, that's absolutely true. That if I want to get more than I've always got, I've got to do more than I've always got. And it doesn't necessarily mean I've got to do actually physically do it more times. Sometimes you've just got to do it a little bit differently, but you've got to change something. And if you don't change something, then you can't expect that the results are going to change.
Yeah, and it's actually it's applies super well to all the things we've talked about, because that is ultimately what sales enablement is about,
Yeah,
to make sure that you keep improving and don't fall into the trap of doing something as you used to do it.
yeah, absolutely that.